The stars glimmered like scattered diamonds against the endless black canvas of space. The ASS Resilience moved quietly, its sleek silver hull catching the light of distant suns. Inside the ship, Captain Jae-sung Park stood absolutely still, his eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed the complex web of alien vessels surrounding them. This was not how first contact was supposed to happen. At least, not according to any galactic protocol known to the Concordance. Humans had arrived in the Orient Trade Corridor with a mixture of curiosity, excitement, and a strange kind of calm that confused every single alien species watching them. The communication channels buzzed with tension. Alien diplomats and military leaders wondered, what were these humans planning? The truth was far more simple and far more complicated than anyone could imagine. "Status report," Captain Park called out, his voice steady and clear. His crew moved with a rhythm that was both disciplined and surprisingly relaxed. Some wore crisp military uniforms, while others had on what looked like comfortable expedition gear. It was a mix that would have been considered unprofessional in any other galactic civilization. Lieutenant Yoon, the communication specialist, turned from her console. Her hands danced over holographic buttons that seemed to respond to her touch like they were alive. "All systems nominal, Captain," she reported. "Alien vessels are maintaining their observation positions. No aggressive movements detected." On the main screen, the lead alien negotiator appeared. It was a being from the Luminescent Collective, a species that looked like a living crystal, with facets that shifted and changed color with each emotional state. Right now, its entire body was a mix of confused blue and frustrated red. "Human vessel Resilience *." The alien's translation device spoke in a precise, almost mechanical tone. "You have not followed standard first contact procedures. Where are your formal diplomatic credentials? Why have you not requested standard trade agreements?" Captain Park smiled. It was not a smile of mockery or aggression. It was a smile of genuine human curiosity. "We're here to learn," he responded simply. "We want to understand your culture, your technology, your way of life. We're not here to demand or negotiate. We're here to connect." The alien's crystalline form flickered between multiple colors. Confusion was an understatement. Humans had a way of breaking every single rule without technically breaking any rule. They approached first contact not as a political maneuver, but as a massive, galaxy-wide research project. Every interaction was an opportunity to learn, to understand, to grow. Lieutenant Yoon pulled up multiple communication logs, translation matrices, and cultural databases. The human team wasn't just preparing for a diplomatic meeting. They were preparing to understand an entirely new civilization from the ground up. "Captain," she said, pointing to a complex graph that showed linguistic and cultural comparison patterns, "our initial analysis shows over 247 potential communication bridges with the Luminescent Collective. We might be able to understand their core communication principles within hours." Hours, not years, not decades. Hours. The alien negotiator's crystal form began to pulse with a deep, worried purple. The humans weren't following any script. They weren't playing by any known rules. They were simply being human. And that was what made them so wonderfully, terrifyingly unique. As the ISS Resilience continued its quiet approach, the galaxy held its collective breath. First contact had just become something entirely unexpected. Dr. Hai-Jin Kim stood in the research lab, surrounded by equipment that looked like it had been designed by a child who loved both science and abstract art. Holographic displays danced around her, showing complex mathematical equations that seemed to breathe and move with a life of their own. Her fingers traced invisible lines in the air, connecting ideas that no one else could see. The Galactic Science Consortium had never seen anything like this before. Just 3 months after first contact, human researchers were already changing everything. They didn't just study alien technologies, they reimagined them completely. Where other species saw walls, humans saw doorways. Where others saw limits, humans saw opportunities. "Look at this," Dr. Kim said to her team of international and alien researchers. Her voice was calm, but her eyes sparkled with excitement. On the holographic display, a quantum communication network began to take shape. It was something the luminescent collective had been trying to solve for over 200 years. The alien scientists watched in total disbelief. Dr. Jun-Ho Park, a materials engineer, was working on something equally impossible. He stood next to a complex machine that looked like a cross between a musical instrument and a spacecraft engine. Alien researchers leaned in, their translation devices working overtime to understand what was happening. "We're not just solving the problem," Dr. Park explained. "We're asking why the problem exists in the first place." This was the fundamental difference. Humans didn't just look for solutions, they questioned the very nature of the problem. In the research center, a group of alien scientists from different species watched the humans work. Some looked worried. Some looked confused. A few looked completely terrified. The Quantum Communication Network project was their first major breakthrough. The luminescent collective had spent centuries trying to create a communication system that could transmit information instantly across vast distances. They had thousands of brilliant scientists working on the project. They had unlimited resources. They had the most advanced technology in the known galaxy. And then the humans arrived. Dr. Kim's team solved the core problem in less than 2 weeks, not by using more power or more complex machines, but by looking at the problem from an entirely different angle. They used something the aliens had never considered: creative thinking mixed with rigorous scientific method. "It's not about having the most advanced technology," Dr. Kim explained to the bewildered alien researchers. "It's about understanding the basic principles and then reimagining them." The communication network they developed was elegant in its simplicity. It used quantum entanglement in a way that no one had ever imagined before. Information could now be transmitted across thousands of light years in milliseconds. The implications were enormous. But this was just the beginning. In research labs across the human research team, similar miracles were happening. A materials engineer was developing new types of energy conductors. A biologist was finding ways to communicate with alien life forms that everyone else thought were impossible to understand. A computer scientist was creating algorithms that could learn and adapt faster than any known artificial intelligence. The Galactic Science Consortium realized something terrifying and wonderful. Humans were not just another species. They were a force of nature. By the end of the first year of first contact, human researchers had solved more scientific challenges than the entire galactic scientific community had in the previous century. They didn't do this through brute force or superior technology. They did it through something far more powerful: unbridled human curiosity and the ability to think differently. And the galaxy was just beginning to understand what that meant. The entertainment screens across the galaxy flickered with something new, something different, something completely unexpected. It started with music. Not the carefully structured, mathematically precise sound waves that most alien species called music. This was human music, wild, emotional, unpredictable. The rhythmic harmony of the Zeta cluster found themselves unexpectedly tapping their multiple appendages to beats that seemed to break all known musical rules. Jazz mixed with electronic sounds. Classical instruments blended with digital synthesizers. It made no sense, and yet it was impossible to stop listening. Wong Ki Lee sat in the Cultural Research Center, watching the data streams with a small smile. He was not just a cultural anthropologist. He was a strategic communication expert who understood something most diplomats missed. Culture was the most powerful weapon of understanding. The alien entertainment networks were going crazy. Human comedy shows were spreading faster than any known communication virus. Stand-up comedians from Earth were becoming galactic celebrities. Their jokes were not just funny. They were windows into human thinking. A crystalline diplomat watched a human comedy special and suddenly understood more about human psychology than 100 years of formal research. The comedian was not just telling jokes. He was explaining how humans think, how they solve problems, how they see the world. It's not about the punchline, Wonki would explain to his research team. It's about the journey of the joke, how we break expectations, how we find humor in complexity. Alien art museums began featuring human artwork. It was messy. It was complicated. It broke every single rule of artistic expression known in the galaxy. Some pieces looked like accidents. Others looked like profound statements about existence. The lines between art, science, and emotion became blurry. A human painter named Minji created visual art that made alien species question their entire understanding of perception. Her paintings looked different depending on who was looking at them. They seemed to change, to move, to live. Literature was another battlefield of cultural understanding. Human books were not just stories. They were complex explorations of emotion, society, and individual experience. Alien readers found themselves understanding concepts they had never even imagined before. The Galactic Culture Council held emergency meetings. How was this happening? How could a species they had just discovered be changing everything so quickly? Wonki's research showed something fascinating. Humans were not trying to replace alien cultures. They were creating bridges, connections, ways of understanding that went beyond language and biology. A young human musician could make a crystalline being from the luminescent collective feel emotions it had never experienced before. A human comedy show could help a robotic species understand the concept of spontaneity. A human painting could make a gas-based life form understand the complexity of solid-state emotions. This was not cultural invasion. This was cultural conversation. The galaxy was listening, and the galaxy was changing. Wonki looked at the data streams and smiled. Humans were not conquering the galaxy with weapons. They were conquering it with curiosity, creativity, and an endless capacity to connect. And nobody saw it coming. Captain Min Wu Kang stood on the bridge of the human battleship Bright Horizon *, his eyes scanning the complex holographic displays that showed the approaching conflict. This was not a typical war. This was not even a typical battle. Alien military commanders had spent centuries developing precise, mathematical approaches to conflict. They had strategies that had been tested and refined over thousands of years. Battles were like complex chess games, with every move calculated years in advance. Humans played chess differently. The enemy fleet was massive. The Kretak Dominion had been conquering star systems for centuries. They were brutal. They were efficient. They were absolutely certain of their victory. They had never met humans before. Tactical analysis, Captain Kang called out. His voice was calm, almost too calm for a commander about to enter a major battle. Lieutenant Jai-Yun Park pulled up a series of holographic projections. They looked like a child's crazy drawing more than a military strategy. Lines went everywhere. Some passed through asteroid fields. Some seemed to curl back on themselves. Some went in directions that made no sense at all. "We have multiple approach vectors," she reported. "Probability of success is interesting." The Kretak commanders watched in total confusion. Human ships were not forming traditional battle formations. They were moving in patterns that looked random. But nothing about humans was truly random. Captain Kang understood something fundamental about conflict that most species missed. War was not about destroying the enemy. War was about solving a problem. The first strange thing happened when human ships began redirecting nearby asteroids, not as weapons, not as shields, but as something else. Massive space rocks began to move in complex patterns. They created temporary gravitational fields that made enemy ship navigation impossible. It was like watching someone solve a math problem by singing a song. The second strange thing was communication. While fighting, human ships were sending complex communication signals, not just to each other, but to the enemy ships and to the surrounding space itself. Lieutenant Park was creating communication interference that wasn't blocking signals. It was changing them, transforming them, making the enemy's own communication systems tell a different story. "We're not fighting," Captain Kang said quietly. We're negotiating. With everything. Quantum entanglement weapons created temporary communication bridges. Asteroid fields became navigation puzzles. Energy weapons were used to create complex light shows that confused enemy targeting systems. The Kratak Dominion had never seen anything like this before. Battles were supposed to be about destruction. Humans turned battles into complex problem-solving exercises. They didn't seek to kill. They sought to change the entire situation. Within hours, the massive Kratak fleet was completely disabled. Not destroyed. Not conquered. Simply transformed. No human ships were damaged. No enemy lives were lost. The conflict was solved like a complicated mathematical equation. The galactic military community watched in total shock. This was not war. This was something else entirely. Humans had just shown the galaxy that conflict could be solved without traditional conflict. And nobody knew what to do with that information. The planet looked dead when humans first arrived. Scared. Broken. A world that had been stripped of life by centuries of industrial mining and careless resource extraction. Every other spacefaring civilization would have written it off as a lost cause. Jayun Park was not every other ecological engineer. She stood on the rocky surface, her environmental suit allowing her to breathe in an atmosphere that most species would have considered impossible. Around her, scanning devices and tiny robots moved like a living network. They were not here to extract. They were here to heal. The Galactic Environmental Council had given up on this planet generations ago. It was in the Sigma Quadrant, a region known for its brutal mining history. Massive corporations had stripped the world of its minerals, leaving behind a landscape that looked more like a wound than a planet. We're going to bring this world back to life, Jayun said to her team. Her voice was calm. Her eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. Most ecological restoration projects took hundreds of years. Humans seemed to work on a different timeline. They didn't see problems. They saw possibilities. The first step was understanding. Not just studying the planet's current condition, but listening to it. The robots began collecting data in ways no one had ever done before. They didn't just measure chemical compositions. They mapped energy flows. They tracked microscopic life forms that other species would have missed completely. Tiny machines began spreading across the rocky surface. Some looked like insects. Some looked like plants. Some looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before. They were not just tools. They were the beginning of a new ecosystem. Bacteria were engineered to break down toxic mineral deposits. Specialized plants were designed to pull poisonous elements from the ground. Each intervention was carefully planned. Each step was part of a larger, complex healing process. The alien scientists who watched the project could not believe what they were seeing. Weeks passed, then months. The first signs of life began to appear. Small green patches, tiny movements in the soil. Water began to flow in places where it had been frozen for centuries. Jayun's team was doing something more than restoration. They were creating a living system. A planet was not just a collection of rocks and chemicals. It was a complex, breathing organism. Other species had technologies for planetary management. Humans had something different. They had imagination. They had patience. They had a deep understanding that everything was connected. By the end of the first year, parts of the planet were already showing signs of complex ecological systems. Small insects began to appear. Pioneering plant species took root. Underground water systems started to regenerate. The Galactic Environmental Council watched in total amazement. This was not just ecological engineering. This was ecological poetry. Humans were not conquering planets. They were healing them. They were creating life where others saw only destruction. And this was just the beginning. Sung Ho Kim stood at the center of the room. He was not tall. He was not imposing. But something about him made everyone listen. Around him sat representatives from 6 different galactic civilizations, species that had been in conflict for generations, species that had tried to solve their problems through war, negotiation, and countless failed peace treaties. Humans were different, and Sung Ho was about to show them exactly how. The conflict was old and complicated. It involved 3 star systems, 2 ancient trade routes, and hundreds of years of misunderstandings. Most diplomatic teams would have brought thick legal documents. Sung Ho brought something else entirely. He started by telling a story. It was not a story about the conflict. It was a story about listening, about understanding, about seeing beyond the surface of things. The crystalline diplomat from the luminescent collective shifted colors. The robotic representatives from the quantum collective adjusted their communication frequencies. The gas-based life forms from the Nebula Consortium momentarily changed their molecular structure, a sign of deep emotional response. Sung Ho was not just talking. He was creating a bridge. Every conflict, he explained, is a misunderstanding waiting to be solved. Not by force, not by law, but by truly hearing each other's stories. He had spent months studying each civilization, not just their official histories, but their myths, their jokes, their daily lives. He understood something fundamental. Diplomacy was not about winning. It was about understanding. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A trade route that had been closed for centuries suddenly became a possibility. Not because of complex legal agreements, but because Sung Ho helped each civilization see the problem from the other's perspective. He used something more powerful than words. He used empathy. For the crystalline beings, he explained their position using the language of light and reflection. For the robotic civilization, he presented the conflict as a complex mathematical problem with multiple solutions. For the gas-based life forms, he used metaphors from fluid dynamics. Each civilization felt heard, really heard, for the first time in generations. The diplomatic meeting was supposed to last weeks. It was resolved in 2 days. But it was more than a resolution. It was a transformation. Alien diplomats looked at each other with new understanding. Old enemies saw each other as potential partners. Generations of conflict began to melt away. Sung Ho did not celebrate. He was already thinking about the next challenge, the next misunderstanding waiting to be solved. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps realized something important. Humans were not just diplomats. They were translators of understanding. They could see connections where others saw only differences. And the galaxy would never be the same. The meeting room was silent, so silent that you could hear the smallest electronic hum of the holographic displays. 12 species sat around a massive circular table. These were not just any representatives. These were the most powerful leaders in the known galaxy. The Galactic Concordance Council had been meeting for days. One topic consumed them completely: humans. They cannot be classified as a standard civilization, said the crystalline representative from the luminescent collective. Its body shifted between colors: blue of confusion, red of concern, green of calculation. The robotic delegate from the quantum collective clicked and whirred. Its voice was mechanical, but carried a tone of something close to respect. Humans are not a threat in the traditional sense, but they are unpredictable. Each species had experienced humans differently, but they all agreed on one thing: humans were something entirely new. The scientific achievements were impossible to ignore. In just a few years, human researchers had solved problems that had stumped entire civilizations for centuries. They didn't just learn. They reimagined entire fields of knowledge. The cultural impact was equally stunning. Human art, music, and stories were spreading across the galaxy faster than any known communication network. They weren't conquering through weapons. They were conquering through understanding. Their diplomatic approach broke every known rule. Sung Ho Kim had resolved conflicts that had lasted generations. Not through force, not through complicated legal agreements, but through something more powerful: genuine communication. In military encounters, humans showed they could disable entire fleets without firing a single destructive weapon. They turned conflicts into complex problem-solving exercises. Wars became opportunities for understanding. Ecological restoration. They didn't just repair damaged worlds. They brought them back to life. Planets that other species had written off as dead became living, breathing ecosystems. "We cannot ignore them," said the gas-based representative from the Nebula Consortium. "But we cannot control them either." After hours of debate, a new classification was created, something that had never existed before in galactic history. Controlled threat, the final document read. It was not a military classification. It was not a political statement. It was a recognition of something fundamental about humans. They were too creative to be predictable, too principled to be dangerous, too curious to be contained. The classification meant humans are welcome, humans are valuable, but humans must be understood. Each species remembered their first encounter with humans. The luminescent collective recalled the strange first communication. The quantum collective remembered the impossible scientific breakthroughs. The Nebula Consortium thought about the ecological miracles. Humans were not conquerors. They were not invaders. They were something else entirely. They were change itself. And the galaxy would never be the same. Captain Jae-sung Park looked at the official Galactic Concordance document. The words "controlled threat" glowed softly on the holographic display. Around him, the human diplomatic team waited. Some looked serious. Some looked curious. A few were trying hard not to laugh. This was not how other species would have reacted. "Well," Captain Park said, his voice calm and clear, "that's interesting." The room filled with a mix of chuckles and thoughtful murmurs. Humans had a way of turning even the most serious situations into an opportunity for understanding. The controlled threat designation was not an insult. It was a compliment. It was a recognition of something fundamental about human nature. Dr. Hai-Jin Kim, the quantum researcher who had revolutionized communication technologies, stepped forward. "We're not here to conquer," she said. "We're here to connect." Those simple words captured everything about human approach to the galaxy. Wong-Ki Lee, the cultural communication expert, was already planning how to explain this classification to different alien species, not as a threat, but as an invitation to understand. The human team was not celebrating. They were not worried. They were simply curious. Each member of the team represented something different about humanity. The scientist who saw every problem as a puzzle. The artist who could create bridges between impossible differences. The diplomat who listened more than he spoke. The ecological engineer who saw life where others saw only destruction. They were not a perfect species. They were a learning species. The Galactic Concordance had tried to create a box to put humans in. But humans did not fit in boxes. They created new shapes, new possibilities. "Controlled threat," Captain Park repeated. He was not reading the words. He was tasting them, understanding them. Sung-Ho Kim, the diplomatic expert who had solved conflicts that had lasted generations, smiled. "We're just trying to be helpful," he said. And that was the truth. Humans were not trying to change the galaxy. They were simply trying to understand it, to help it, to connect with it in ways no one had ever imagined before. The classification meant different things to different alien species. To the luminescent collective, it meant unpredictable creativity. To the quantum collective, it meant impossible problem-solving. To the Nebula Consortium, it meant a new way of seeing life itself. Humans were not a weapon. They were not a problem to be solved. They were a question to be explored. In the vast, complex tapestry of galactic civilization, humans were the unexpected thread. The thread that made everything more interesting, more alive, more possible. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity was just getting started.